During the early afternoon of the 24th of November 1971, the passengers of the Northwest Airlines Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle are checking in. Among them is a seemingly ordinary man wearing a dark raincoat, a suit, his hair neatly combed, and his only luggage is a black briefcase. Later, a witness describes him as looking like a business executive. At the counter, he purchases a one-way ticket to Seattle, stating his name is Dan Cooper. The flight should take only 30 minutes and honestly could not be less exciting. After the passengers take their seat, the Boeing 727 takes off. There are 36 passengers on board. Dan Cooper seats himself in the rear of the aircraft. After taking off, the man flags down a flight attendant. He orders a bourbon and soda. As he receives his drinks, he lights a cigarette, nips from his drink, and walks up to the stewardess that had just served him, Florence Schaffner. Now, as you can see on the photograph, a Boeing 727-100 has a staircase in the rear that is to be lowered for passengers to exit and enter the plane. Mid-flight, Florence sits next to the stairs when the man approaches her. While smoking a cigarette, he hands her a piece of paper with something written on it. Florence, 23 years old and pretty, initially thinks it is another lonely businessman that would want a date. It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to get her attention that way. She puts the note, unread, in her purse. In response, the man leans towards her. He whispers, "Ma'am, you might want to read what's on that note. I am carrying a bomb." And with those words, one of the most curious unsolved skyjackings in the history of aviation begins. The note he handed Florence read, "I want $200,000 before 5 p.m. this afternoon in $20 bills cash. Put it in a backpack. I want 4 parachutes. When we land, I want the plane to be refueled. Don't do anything stupid, or the bomb will explode." She is then sent to the cockpit to communicate the demands to the pilots. When she returns, Cooper has put on sunglasses, which lead to the sketch of him wearing them. In the cockpit, the pilot William Scott has received the demands. He communicates them to the tower in Seattle while using the intercom to notify the passengers that the plane is a bit delayed due to a technical error. Meanwhile, Cooper remains calm and, as Florence later recalls, even a bit charming. She describes him as well-spoken, polite, and not at all like those career criminals. He orders a second drink, again bourbon with soda, and pays with a $20 bill, telling her she can keep the change. Furthermore, it seems that Cooper is familiar with the area, mentioning at a certain point, a city that he can see from the sky looks like Tacoma. And he indeed was looking at Tacoma. For the next 2 hours, the plane is circling in the sky. The FBI, immediately informed about the situation, tried their best to get the ransom and parachutes. Getting the parachutes proved more complicated than initially thought, because Cooper explicitly requested civilian parachutes, not military ones. Eventually, a local skydive centrum turned out to be the answer. As for the money, several local banks are ordered to give up all $20 bills by the FBI. And for good measure, several snipers are placed around the landing strip where the plane would eventually land. The ransom money is photographed, so the serial numbers are known, and once the money is spent and reported, they will be able to track down Cooper. Through radio, it is communicated to the pilots that the money and the parachutes are ready at the Seattle-Tacoma airport, and on 5:39 p.m. the plane lands on the landing strip. Cooper makes the pilots taxi the plane to a secluded but well-lit area, and he then orders the cockpit to dim their lights and then allow all the passengers to leave the aircraft. After this, Al Lee, the manager of Northwest Orient Seattle Airfield, approaches the plane with a package containing the $200,000. Cooper receives the packet. As the plane is refueled, he coordinates a departure with the pilots. He wants to fly towards Mexico City with deployed landing gear, lowered wing flaps at 15 degrees, and an unpressurized cabin. Cooper orders the pilot not to pass 3 kilometers in elevation and keep the landing gear extended. This reduces the maximum speed of the plane. After a successful refueling, they fly off in the direction of Mexico with the money and parachutes on board. It seems like Cooper may actually get away with it. Now, the entire hijack ends in a very peculiar way. The pilots are in their cockpit and Cooper is on his own in the back of the plane. Nobody is with him, and the pilots have their doors closed. In the cockpit, after 45 odd minutes of flying in a southern direction, the pilots notice a change in pressure in the rear compartment of the aircraft. What supposedly happened is that Cooper tied the ransom package to his body with a parachute cord. He then put on 2 parachutes, one on his back and one on his front. He lowers the stairs at the rear of the aircraft mid-flight, and walks down. Due to rain and thick clouds, he is unable to see the earth, but he jumps regardless. The FBI report states somewhere between Seattle and Reno, a little after 8 p.m., the hijacker did the incredible. He jumped out of the plane with a parachute and the ransom money. Now, because the airplane only consisted of the pilots and Cooper, nobody saw him jump. Because of the change in pressure in the compartment as they're mid-flight, the pilots reckon Cooper might have left the aircraft. They notify the FBI when they notice the change, but it isn't until the plane lands in Reno airport after 10 p.m., 2 hours later, that it is confirmed Cooper is no longer in the aircraft. A manhunt is immediately on its way. On this map, you can see the suspected landing zone and the flight path of the aircraft. In the immediate aftermath, there is no clue of Cooper. He's simply gone. The area where he parachuted into is filled with cliffs, thick woods, rivers, and lakes. The search area is enormous because of the height he jumped from. Throughout the entire night and next morning, boats sail the nearby Lake Merwin and Yale Lake without any success. Helicopters that search the woods and cliffs with flashlights don't return the hijacker either. Everything points towards Cooper getting away with this crazy and daring plan. And although the media judge most criminals, Cooper is turned into some sort of hero status. The press talks about this Hollywood film-like hijacking continuously. Cooper's acts captured the public's imagination, and the fact he wasn't caught left a sense of mystery around the case. How was it possible that he got away with it? As for suspects, the first official suspect was a man named D.B. Cooper, living in Oregon. Yeah, as if this man would have used his real name. Nevertheless, this D.B. Cooper is listed as an official suspect, and when a journalist catches on, he scrambles the names, naming the robber D.B. Cooper. As such, the robber, Dan Cooper, became known as D.B. Cooper. As for the actual D.B. Cooper, it soon becomes clear he didn't hijack the airplane and jumped out of it when the police find him at his home. So, are there any clues then when Cooper left in the aircraft? Well, yeah, quite a lot to be fair. First of all, he left his tie pin, and 66 fingerprints. But perhaps most importantly, he never tried to hide his face. He was seen by so many people on the plane that some very realistic composite sketches were made of his face. Oh, and he certainly must have had some experience with parachute jumping if we want to assume he didn't have a death wish, and he seemed knowledgeable about civilian air traffic considering he knew he could open the trapdoor mid-flight. This was not even known to some people working with airplanes because, well, who opens a trapdoor mid-flight? His specific demands about the wing flaps and the landing gear support the thesis that he had some professional aviation knowledge. The fact this specific Boeing is one of the few planes with stairs in the back and with motors high enough that they wouldn't burn Cooper as he jumped from the plane points towards expert knowledge of civilian aircraft. Furthermore, he may have gotten his name from Dan Cooper, a comic series about a test pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. All that is sure is that Cooper wasn't found, nor were his parachutes or the ransom money. It wasn't for several years that the police would see some of the ransom money back. Because of the upcoming winter season, the manhunt in the area was postponed as a blizzard simply made the region unworkable. The search was resumed in early 1972. FBI agents, volunteers, employees of Northwest Airlines, and 200 soldiers spent 36 days combing through the area Cooper dropped into. A body was found, but it turned out it was of a missing teenager. Meanwhile, the news made international headlines, and there was a global lookout for the dollar bills. A reward of $1,000 was issued to the person that managed to track the bill that was coming from the ransom. Nevertheless, these extensive searches yielded no results. Neither the money, parachute, or Cooper was found. The FBI states they interviewed hundreds of people, tracked leads across the nation, and searched the aircraft for evidence. By the 5th anniversary of the hijacking, they'd considered more than 800 suspects and eliminated all but 24 from consideration. Theories range from Cooper working in the chemical industry to Cooper being a transgender mechanic from Washington state. It wasn't until 6 years later that a hunter found a manual to open the Boeing 727 stairs north of Lake Merwin, the first sign that Cooper actually dropped in the area. Nearly 9 years later, in 1980, the 8-year-old Brian Ingram is camping with his family around the Columbia River, downstream from Vancouver, Washington. Over there, he finds 3 packages containing $5,800. It was part of the ransom money, and the bills were heavily damaged, some were missing, and the remaining bills were wrapped together. The missing bills were never found, and there is no satisfying answer as to why the package with bills was over there. It was outside of the area that Cooper could have landed in, and, well, it remained mostly quiet after that. That isn't to say the media went quiet as well, because Cooper became a cult hero. His name became synonymous with curious unsolved mysteries, and in 2007, 36 years after the hijacking, the FBI announced they managed to create a partial DNA profile from the tie-pin. A new composition drawing was published which shows an aged Cooper, and evidence, such as an image of the ticket he bought, was published. The FBI also came out with a bit of a curious detail. It turned out one of the parachutes Cooper used was a parachute made for practice. The parachute bag was sewn up, meaning, at most, Cooper would have just had one working parachute when he jumped from the plane at high speed, but no credible leads arise following the release of new evidence. Although by then the case was still open, the FBI admitted the most likely turn of events was that Cooper did not survive his jump. He parachuted from an incredible height into a heavily wooded area, unable to steer because of the storm. In July 2016, the FBI announced it had redirected resources allocated to the Cooper case in order to focus on other investigative priorities. They said the case was one of the most prolonged and most exhaustive in the agency's history. As such, the Cooper case remained one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in FBI history. But in the same week the FBI closed the case, a History Channel documentary aired following a 5-year-long investigation by a private detective hired by TV producer Tom Colbert. The documentary claimed Cooper did not just survive the parachute jump, but he was still alive in 2016. It pointed to a 72-year-old California man, Robert W. Rexstraw. Rexstraw was a Vietnam War veteran that had training in parachute jumping. He was questioned about the skyjack in 1978 but denied being Cooper, and the next year he was stripped off the suspects list. In response to the documentary, Rexstraw's lawyer said the allegation was the stupidest thing he ever heard and that his client wasn't Cooper, but nobody wanted to listen. The lead the investigations claimed that led them to this conclusion was a letter that was sent to several major news outlets in December 1971, a month after the hijack. A then Cooper sent it, and the taunting letter contained a string of letters and numbers at the bottom of the page. Thought to be a prank initially, a codebreaker decoded the message and said it pointed to 3 army units Rexstraw was connected to when he was in Vietnam. The letter supposedly served as confirmation to those that knew he planned the skyjack to let them know he was alive and survived the jump. The letter was obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, and its contents also point towards Rexstraw's detailed skill sets he received from service with the Green Berets in 1968, among which high-altitude military parachuting, psychological operations, and special forces classes. Colbert also claimed that the FBI tried to keep the case unsolved because Rexstraw supposedly was a CIA operative. His employment at the CIA was never confirmed though, and he had a criminal past, among which a murder charge of his stepfather, which he was acquitted of during the trial though, aircraft theft, possession of explosives, and check fraud. But when a witness was confronted with a photograph of Rexstraw, she said he didn't look anything like the man she saw in the aircraft. If Rexstraw indeed was Cooper, he would have been 28 years old at the time of the skyjack. But so far no arrests have been made, and the FBI denied any formal investigation or follow-up. As such, the infamous skyjacking by Dan Cooper remains just that, one of the FBI's most exhaustive and most extraordinary unsolved cases. Certainly DB Cooper's case isn't the only unsolved mystery, so if there's a case you'd like to know more about and perhaps see a video of, let me know your thoughts in a comment. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I would also really like to thank all my patrons for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and want to support my work, consider checking me out on Patreon. For just $1 a month, you will gain access to the exclusive Patreon series. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.